The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days, but that wasn't why Marcus Chen sat in his parked car outside the convenience store at 2 in the morning, hands trembling on the steering wheel. He'd been sitting there for 40 minutes, watching the fluorescent lights flicker inside, watching her move behind the counter with that same gentle efficiency she'd shown him 6 months ago when his world was ending. He didn't know her name, he'd never asked, but she had saved his life, and she had no idea. It started on a Tuesday in March, the kind of grey morning that makes you forget the sun ever existed. Marcus had lost his job 3 weeks prior, his wife had left him 2 weeks before that, and his father's medical bills were crushing him like a vice grip he couldn't escape. The apartment was gone. The car would be next. At 34 years old, he'd watched his entire life collapse like a house of cards, each piece falling in slow motion while he stood helpless to stop it. That morning, he'd made a decision. He'd written the letters, organized his documents, and walked out of the homeless shelter where he'd been staying with a terrible calm settling over him. He had $23 in his pocket and a plan to end the pain. But first, he needed cigarettes. One last vice before the final choice. The convenience store on Fletcher Avenue was the closest one. He walked in, the bell above the door chiming cheerfully, mockingly, and there she was, this woman behind the counter, maybe in her 60s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and eyes that seemed to actually see him, not through him, like most people had started to do, but actually see him. "Morning, sweetheart," she'd said, her voice carrying a warmth that felt like it belonged to a different world than the one he was living in. "You look like you could use some coffee." Fresh pot just finished brewing. Marcus had opened his mouth to say he was just there for cigarettes, but something in her expression stopped him. There was no pity there, no judgment, just an open kindness that felt so foreign he almost didn't recognize it. "I don't," he started, then stopped. "I don't have much money." She waved her hand dismissively. "Coffee's on the house today. Call it a special promotion. One of those random acts of kindness everyone's always talking about." She poured him a large cup, added cream without asking how he took it, and pushed it across the counter. "And here, take these." She grabbed 2 packaged muffins from the display. "Manager's special. Can't sell them tomorrow anyway." Marcus had stood there, holding the hot cup, feeling its warmth seep into his frozen hands, and for the first time in weeks, he felt something crack inside his chest. Not break, crack open, like maybe there was still something alive in there. "Thank you," he whispered. "You're welcome, honey. You have a good day now." "And hey," she'd called as he turned to leave, "whatever you're carrying, it won't last forever. I promise you that. The dark times don't last forever." He'd walked out of that store, sat on the curb, and drank that coffee, ate those muffins, and cried for the first time since his wife left. Really cried. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and desperate and finally finding a crack in the wall to release the pressure. He didn't go through with his plan that day. He went back to the shelter, made some phone calls. The next day, he showed up at a temp agency. The day after that, he got a 1-day assignment, then another, then a week-long gig. Small steps, but steps forward instead of toward the edge of oblivion. Now, 6 months later, Marcus had a steady job at a warehouse, a tiny studio apartment, and enough saved to start making payments on his dad's medical bills. He'd crawled out of the pit, inch by inch, day by day, and it had all started with a cup of coffee and 2 muffins from a woman who saw his humanity when he'd forgotten he had any. He'd driven past this store dozens of times, always meaning to stop in, to thank her, to let her know what her small kindness had meant. But fear had kept him away, fear that she wouldn't remember him, fear that putting his gratitude into words would somehow diminish what she'd done, fear that he'd break down in the middle of the store and make a scene. Tonight, Watching the rain hammer against his windshield, Marcus decided fear had controlled enough of his life. He got out of the car, walked through the rain, and pushed open the door. She was there, restocking candy bars on the shelf behind the counter. She looked up at the chime, and her face broke into that same warm smile. "Evening. Terrible night to be out and about," she said cheerfully. "What can I get you?" Marcus walked up to the counter, his heart pounding. Do you remember me from about 6 months ago?" She studied his face, her eyes crinkling with concentration. "You know, honey, I see a lot of faces, but something about you." She tilted her head. "Were you the young man with the coffee?" "March, wasn't it?" "Early morning?" Relief flooded through him. Yes, that was me." She smiled. "I remember. You looked like you were having a rough go of it. Help things are better now?" Marcus felt his throat tighten. They're so much better. And I came here tonight because I needed to tell you something. I needed you to know." He paused, searching for the right words. "That morning, when you gave me that coffee and those muffins, when you talked to me like I mattered, I was planning to kill myself that day." Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening. "I had it all planned out," Marcus continued, the words tumbling out now. "I was going to smoke those cigarettes and then end it. But you treated me with such kindness, such simple, genuine kindness. And it reminded me that maybe, just maybe, I was still worth something. That small act saved my life, and I needed you to know that. I needed to thank you." Tears were streaming down the woman's face now. She came around the counter and pulled Marcus into a fierce hug. "Oh, sweetheart, oh my God, I had no idea. I just try to be kind to people. You never know what someone's going through." "Exactly," Marcus said, hugging her back, his own tears falling freely now. "You never know, and because you were kind, because you saw me as a human being when I felt invisible, I'm still here. I have a job now, an apartment. I'm helping my dad. I'm rebuilding my life, all because you gave me coffee and muffins and reminded me I mattered." They stood there for a long moment, two strangers connected by a thread of compassion that had literally meant the difference between life and death. When they finally pulled apart, both were wiping their eyes and laughing through their tears. "What's your name?" Marcus asked. "I realized I never knew it." "Dorothy," she said. "Dorothy Mills." "And yours?" "Marcus Chen." "It's an honor to officially meet you, Dorothy." "The honor is mine, Marcus, truly." She squeezed his hand. "You know, I've been doing this job for 18 years. Sometimes it feels monotonous, you know. Same tasks, same routine. I've wondered if I make any difference at all. But tonight, you've shown me that even the smallest gestures matter. Maybe especially the smallest gestures." Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "I want you to have this. It's not much, but it's $500. I want you to use it to buy coffee and muffins for anyone who comes in here looking like I did that morning. Anyone who looks lost or broken or invisible. Give them that moment of kindness in my name. In our name." Dorothy's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Marcus, I can't. Please," he insisted. "Let me pay forward what you did for me. Let's create a chain of kindness. Who knows how many lives we might touch." She took the envelope with trembling hands. "I will. I promise you I will. And I'll keep track. Every person I help, I'll think of you and how brave you are for choosing to stay, for choosing to fight, for choosing to be here." They exchanged phone numbers, promised to stay in touch. As Marcus walked back out into the rain, he felt lighter than he had in years. The rain didn't bother him anymore. Nothing could touch the warmth spreading through his chest. He sat in his car for a moment, watching Dorothy through the window as she returned to her work. the envelope sitting carefully beside the register. He thought about all the people who would walk through those doors in the coming weeks and months. People having bad days, terrible days, days that felt like the end. And he thought about Dorothy greeting each one with that smile, that genuine warmth, maybe offering them coffee and a muffin and a reminder that they mattered. Small acts of kindness. That's all it took sometimes. A cup of coffee, a warm smile, a moment of being seen. In a world that could feel cruel and indifferent, these tiny gestures of humanity were everything. They were lifelines thrown to drowning souls. They were lights in the darkness. They were proof that goodness still existed. Marcus started his engine and pulled out into the night, heading home to his small apartment where he'd sit down and write in the journal his therapist had suggested he keep. He'd write about tonight, about Dorothy, about the beautiful circle of kindness that had started with her generosity and was now flowing back into the world, multiplied. He'd write about how one person, doing a simple kind thing without expectation of recognition or reward, had changed the trajectory of his entire life. How she'd been his angel without even knowing it. How her humanity had restored his own. And he'd write about hope, because if Dorothy could save him with coffee and kindness, if he could turn his pain into purpose, then maybe, just maybe, there were thousands of other Dorothys and Marcuses out there, creating chains of compassion one small act at a time, weaving a net of humanity strong enough to catch anyone who was falling. The rain was finally letting up as Marcus drove home, and through the breaking clouds, he could see the first stars beginning to emerge. Tomorrow, he'd wake up in his own bed, go to his job, live his life. A life that almost ended on a great Tuesday in March. A life saved by a woman whose name he hadn't even known until tonight. Her, Dorothy. An ordinary woman doing an ordinary job, performing extraordinary acts of kindness that rippled out in ways she'd never imagined. Proof that we all have the power to save each other, one gentle gesture at a time.